Despite Tamagotchi mania first exploding in the 90s, it's recently seen a bit of a resurgence due to 90s kids now being hungry for trinkets bringing back the childhood nostalgia. Bandai, the company behind the Tamagotchi, are well aware of this and have started reprinting the original devices specifically to cater to this audience. However, the brand actually goes way further than these original keychain devices, and there's a whole new generation of Tamagotchi lovers out there. So join me as we celebrate the legacy of these amazing virtual pets, because this is the history of Tamagotchi. Like many of our childhood favourite trends, Tamagotchi was born in Japan. Akihiro Yokoi was a toy manufacturing executive at a small company called Wizco, and supposedly came across an advert involving a boy who wasn't allowed to bring his pet turtle on holiday. Exactly what this advert was for is unknown, but the important detail is that Yokoi was inspired to create a pet that you could take anywhere you wanted, regardless of what your parents might say. The issue was working out how to make a portable virtual pet that was not only fun but also cost efficient. At this point it was 1996 and the Game Boy had cemented itself as the most popular portable video game console ever made. But it was quite expensive, costing $90 on its release in 1989, with later revisions such as the Game Boy Pocket being a bit cheaper, costing $50 in 1997. But Yokoi wanted his creation to cost even less than that. The idea was that practically anybody would be able to get their hands on these, but in order to do that, he had several hurdles. First, he needed to somehow make the devices incredibly cheaply, and second, he needed to be able to make them on such a massive scale that he could keep up with the potential demand from customers. The solution to this problem actually mimics exactly what Gunpei Yokoi had previously achieved with Nintendo's Game & Watch devices, which we covered in the last History Of video. Despite this strange coincidence, and the fact that Gunpei Yokoi and Akihiro Yokoi share their last names, they aren't actually related, so maybe it's just that everyone with the name Yokoi has the potential to be an amazing hardware designer. Either way, the decision was made to create these virtual pet devices using extremely cheap components that were considered massively outdated, but repurpose them into something new, bringing down the cost to mass manufacture and the price for consumers too. As such, the first Tamagotchi designs would use a black and white LCD screen, small batteries and minimal buttons. However, what Yokoi needed to bring his idea to fruition was a company with a lot of money and that was willing to take a risk. This company also needed to have a hell of a lot of marketing power, lots of hardware manufacturing processes and a global reach. Aki Maito was a member of Bandai's marketing team and was concerned that they were falling behind with the American market. After getting wind of Akihiro Yokoi's concept, the duo teamed up and initially had a hard time getting Bandai on board. After some convincing by conducting surveys with groups of high school girls and seeing the positive response from these test audiences though, they finally were given the go-ahead to enter development. It was around this time that the name Tamagotchi was given to these virtual pets, with the name coming from the words Tamago and Uochi, which translates loosely to egg watch. The original concept for the devices looked a bit like watches that you would wear on your wrist, which is where the Tamagotchi name stemmed from, but this design was later reworked into a keychain, which of course is the design we're all familiar with today. The characters featured in the Tamagotchi devices were created by the design team at Bandai, and the gameplay was also handled by Bandai, with the main feature being the passage of real-world time affecting the creature. The device would beep whenever the creature inside of it needed attention, and you would then have to cater to its needs, cleaning it, feeding it, and otherwise interacting with it, and then the sense of reward comes from the way that the creature will change appearance and develop personality traits based on how attentive or inattentive you are. Of course, one of the most infamous elements of the gameplay is the fact that your Tamagotchi will die if you leave it alone for too long, incentivizing you to keep coming back to take care of your pet to avoid this happening. The Japanese version of the Tamagotchi devices were a little bit less subtle with its death sequences, showing a tombstone on the screen as opposed to the slightly happier tone in the Western versions, which show your Tamagotchi turning into an angel. This led to a little bit of a moral panic among certain groups, stating that the kids were bursting into tears and showing signs of depression upon the virtual pet dying. In order to avoid this tragic fate, kids would bring the devices to school and inevitably become distracted by them, likely causing Tamagotchis to get banned across a lot of schools in the country. While kids were obviously trying to look after their pets as much as possible, in the original Tamagotchi devices, death was actually an inevitable part of the gameplay loop. It was impossible to keep your critter alive forever, and even with perfect care, it would eventually pass away due to old age. Tamagotchi, the only toy guaranteed to traumatize your child. Buy it today. The genius of Tamagotchi is that it's a game which literally forces constant interaction. You're obviously going to want your creature to like you and turn out the best it can be, and of course you definitely want to avoid the looming threat of death at all costs. And the only way to do that is to constantly interact with it. It becomes a part of your everyday life, and as such, it would become pretty addictive. It's like Animal Crossing on steroids. Not only is the gameplay enticing though, but the fact that the devices were comparatively cheap and came in multiple differently designed shells added in a collectible element too. If you were invested in Tamagotchi, the odds are you probably ended up buying more than one just so you could mix up the designs and maybe even raise multiple different creatures all at once. Needless to say, Tamagotchi was a success. 6 months after releasing in Japan, it had sold over 5 million units, with the main audience being young girls, which early marketing targeted quite heavily. Tamagotchi, need love and care. Got a boy, take her anywhere. The release in America was similarly successful, releasing a year later in 1997 with worldwide sales exceeding $70 million just a few months later. While Tamagotchi would remain popular throughout the 90s, it would never quite reach these astronomical numbers again, which is probably partially due to a lot of somewhat similar competition releasing soon after. In 1998, the world was introduced to the Furby, and while this was less of a video game and more of a straight up toy, it did feature similar design elements, with the aspects of interactivity and raising your pet creature, just like we saw with the Tamagotchi. But we're not done with the legacy of the Tamagotchi just yet, because it turns out that these little devices also served as the inspiration for another massive franchise. Remember how Tamagotchi was primarily marketed towards girls, especially in the earlier promotional material? This led to Bandai spotting a pretty obvious gap in the market and creating a similar line of toys that would appeal more to boys, which culminated in an entire new franchise. And what would this new series turn out to be? None other than Digimon.
Digimon! Challenge another Digimon! And if you taught your monster well, he'll be victorious!
That's right, Digimon started out as something of a Tamagotchi spin-off, but separated itself by featuring combat mechanics and even allowing you to connect two devices to battle other Digimon owners. The original Digimon devices were popular, but had nowhere near the same level of success as Tamagotchi did. However, Digimon proved significantly more successful with the multimedia efforts, spawning an incredibly popular TV series, which is still ongoing to this very day, loads of films, console video games, manga, a trading card game, and countless other merchandise. But while Digimon was exploding onto the scene, what exactly happened to Tamagotchi? Well, various new models were released through the years, all featuring new gimmicks to keep the gameplay loop fresh. One of the most prominent new models was the Tamagotchi Connection, released in 2004, and this allowed players to exchange gifts, play games together, and even have Tamagotchi babies. Great, even more responsibility. We've been getting new Tamagotchi models as recently as 2021, which is when Tamagotchi Pix released. This one has a full colour screen screen and even has a camera to take pictures for your Tamagotchi to interact with. There's actually been a recent resurgence in the popularity of Tamagotchi, most likely spurred on by a few factors, one of which being that Bandai re-released the original version of the Tamagotchi in 2017, which proved pretty successful at the time, but really took off during the pandemic when nobody had anything better to do but to get reinvested in looking after a virtual pet from the 90s. Then we also had the newest version of Tamagotchi release earlier this year with Tamagotchi Uni, which actually brings things back full circle, with this variant offering a watch strap to attach to your wrist, just like Akihiro Yokoi originally wanted. Tamagotchi Uni can even connect to the internet and access something called the Tamiverse, where you can play games with other people, go on dates, go on a tour, or even get fashion advice. It's just like real life. When a Tamagotchi approaches adulthood in this version, it will ask if it can move out and see the world for itself, and if you say yes, it will leave nothing more than an egg behind. Geez, Tamagotchi really like tugging on your heartstrings. Of course though, the story of Tamagotchi doesn't really end there. The legacy of the devices is absolutely undeniable, which is proved by how they're still alive and kicking today. However, with this consistent popularity comes a lot of imitators. One of the craziest Tamagotchi-inspired devices actually came from Nintendo, who brought out Pokemon Pikachu in 1998. To the game's credit, this worked quite dramatically differently from Tamagotchi, not requiring constant care, but instead interacting with you based on how many steps you take using the built-in pedometer. This device eventually led to the creation of the Pokewalker, which was bundled with Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and allowed you to gain experience points by walking around. This was actually considered one of the most accurate pedometers available at the time, and the technology was later repurposed for Wii Fit U. The whole walking around to interact with your Pokemon concept was probably the inspiration for Pokemon Go too. So if you trace everything back, it all leads to Tamagotchi. Funnily enough, in 2019, there would be an official collaboration between Tamagotchi and Pokemon with the release of the EVX Tamagotchi device. So clearly, there's no bad blood between the two companies. But while Pokemon Pikachu can't really be considered a straight up knockoff, the same can't really be said for other popular devices such as the Tiger Electronics Gigapets line and the Nano Pet, which was created by Playmates. I guess the difference with these devices is that they mostly consisted of real-world animals to look after, rather than the otherworldly Tamagotchi creatures. But even so, the similarities are undeniable. Gigapets even tried to copy the success of Digimon with their Nano Fighter variants, but clearly it didn't quite work out all that well for them. But while all of these pretenders to the throne are long forgotten, the true champion of the virtual pet remains strong, and Tamagotchi is still king. You can't help though but analyse the Tamagotchi craze as a sort of forebearer to today's society. Just as we used to be locked to our Tamagotchi devices, tending to its every beep and boop, are we now doing the exact same thing but with our constantly online mobile devices? Instead of a digital creature to nourish, maybe it's our own online personas we're catering to, feeding its social engagement with our status updates and holiday snaps, which gives us validation through likes and follows, in the same way our Tamagotchi would tell us it's happy and content. Did Tamagotchi predict our technology-obsessed future, or was it a means to ease us into our always online way of life? But that is the history of Tamagotchi. Definitely give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop a comment down below letting me know if you ever had a Tamagotchi and what your favourite memories of them are. Also remember to feed and clean up after that subscribe button for more retro content coming soon, and I've been Rob from Retro Dodo, and I'll see you in the next one.